Awesome. Cool. All right. Welcome everyone to the So You Want to Work in Labor panel. We'll start the event first with a land acknowledgement and then get to introductions. So as we virtually gather together this afternoon, we'll be taking time to acknowledge the land we are on and the Indigenous people it was stolen from. The Bridges Center is located at the University of Washington Seattle campus, and our institutions and homes occupy the unceded homelands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Snoqualmie, Puyallup, Muckleshoot, Tulalip, and other Coast Salish peoples and their descendants. It is also important to acknowledge that based on our identities, our experiences on the stolen land can be very different. We all must remind ourselves that we inhabit colonized land and the racial and colonial violence waged by the US empire is ongoing. The website that either I or Rachel will link in the chat is a helpful resource for learning more about whose land you're on, and it is native-land.ca. So if you're able in the chat, please share whose land you're on and introduce yourself, and we'll take a moment to do so. Additionally, we'll also share a link to Real Rent Duwamish, and we urge folks to visit the website, pay rent if you are able. You're able to do that on an either one-time or ongoing basis, as well as to learn about the Duwamish people's ongoing pursuit of federal recognition and learn more about local Indigenous-led movements. So folks, please go ahead and take some time to do that in the chat. Just a reminder to make sure that you're on mute as well. I'll go ahead and introduce myself to folks. So my name is Sai Ahmed. I use they, them pronouns, and I work at the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies at the University of Washington, located in Seattle on Coast Salish people's land and Duwamish people's land. And I work as the Assistant Director for Student and Community Engagement, and I've been in this position for the past 4 years supporting students who are interested in engaging in labor studies and the broader labor movement. And I will go ahead and pass it off to Rachel.
Thanks, Sai. My name is Rachel Ursed. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I live also on the unceded land of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Snoqualmie, the Suquamish, and many more, including the Duwamish. And I just was able to put in the chat the Real Rent link. Please visit that if you are able to do so. And even if you're not able to contribute rent to, as Sai mentioned, I'll learn about the ongoing fights. And I have been at the Bridges Center for about 9 months. Really excited to be here today to hear from and learn from all of you. And prior to that, I worked at SEIU Healthcare 1199 Northwest. So yeah, good to see folks today. So I'm just going to give a couple of minutes for folks to put whose land they're on in the chat, and then we will keep going. For folks who are just entering, welcome. Glad to have you here today. And we are naming whose land we are on. And feel free to share that in the chat along with your name, where you work or where you're going to school, your pronouns, and anything else you'd like to share. So folks, please continue to share in the chat. And just so we can keep going on this really exciting conversation, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing here today. So Sai and I, my coworker Sai and I, have discussed for a while the importance of having a space that really reflects a lot of the different positions and the opportunities and ways that people can engage with and start work within the labor movement. And there's not just one way to do that or one type of position to do that. And fortunately, between our connections as well as the connections of others that we know and work with, we were able to reach out to a really great group of folks today and want this to be accessible to everyone, regardless of age, regardless of if they're in a school setting or not, or a college or university setting or not. Like, this is intended for folks who are interested in learning more or just sharing their own experiences or connecting with some really cool panelists about work that's happening in the labor movement, and want to name that all types of positions that support working people are critical and important and needed. And that is, we're really excited to hear a little bit more about what's brought some of our panelists or all of our panelists to this work, as well as things that they want to share with us about. For those of us who may be interested in working in labor in the future, currently do, and might be interested in other positions, or any other reason that you're here today. And yeah. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing. So we're going to the agenda of this event will be every one of our panelists will introduce themselves, their pronouns, where they work. And then after we get done with that, we're going to transition into some questions that Sai will start us off with. So I'm going to turn it over first to Eunice Howe. Eunice, if you can introduce yourself. Andrew, can you put yourself on mute? I'll try to do the same.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eunice Howe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a lead community and political organizer with Unite Here Local 8.
Awesome. And Guillermo, you're next.
Hey, everybody. Guillermo, political and legislative organizer at Teamsters Local 117.
Thank you. Having a couple of tech issues. Hang on one second. And also, we're going in order of folks being listed on the panel. And one of our panelists who's so gracious to join today needed to move down a little bit because of childcare. So I'm going to turn it over to the wonderful James to introduce themselves.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm James, James Oliveros. I use they, them pronouns. I've been working at the Labor Center or the Washington Labor Education and Research Center for just under a year now. I'm a labor educator there, and we're basically a resource for folks to learn about things like workers' rights, how to become a good steward, labor history, and more. And we offer these kinds of trainings to the public and also to unions who contract us out and other worker groups. But my background is in other kinds of organizing with leftist Filipino youth in the Seattle area. I could talk about that more later. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, James. And now, Amy.
Hey everybody, Amy Leong, she, her. I'm the lead organizer on staff with APALA, the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. We are a constituency group, so we're under the AFL umbrella, but we work to connect the broader AA and HPI community and the labor movement as we're working to fight for better standards.
Thank you, Amy. Ada.
Hi, everyone. My pronouns are she, her. I was an organizer at ICIU Healthcare 1199 Northwest, the Healthcare Workers Union in Washington State, and I'm now doing research there. Yeah, great to see you all.
Patrice.
Hi, good afternoon. Afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm on the East Coast. I was about to say good evening. Patrice Tisdale with the Drivers Union. I'm their general counsel there.
Thanks, Patrice. Morgan.
Hey everyone, I'm Morgan Courier. I use she, her pronouns. I used to be an organizer with BOCW 21 in Seattle and also SCIU 1199 in Seattle. And now I'm a lead organizer with the Committee of Interns and Residents based in Los Angeles, representing our resident physicians. Good to see you all.
Thanks for being here, Morgan, and everyone. So we are going to introduce our last panelists a little later because, as mentioned, they are picking up some dependents, picking up some kids, which is a great thing to do as well. So I am going to turn it over to my colleague Sai to begin our questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rachel. And just want to echo another thanks to all the panelists as well for being here. So we have a few guided questions for the panelists, and then later on we will open it up to broader Q&A. But if any questions occur to you during the course of the guided questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as well. But to start us off with our first question, we want to pose to the panel: how did you take your passion for labor and working people's issues and move that into a paid position? And I want to pose this question specifically to Eunice, but if others have thoughts to add, I would like to welcome thoughts throughout, and that this applies to all the questions too. So.
Thanks so much, Sai. I can kick it off. So I actually went to the UW. I graduated in 2012 with a bachelor's in public health. And when I was in school, I was part of the USAS group, United Students Against Sweatshops. Any USAS, current USASers or alums here? Whoop, whoop, we're making an emoji. Whoop, whoop. Okay, great. And so through that work, that amazing work, right, we can't win, as we know, under a capitalist structure without building together across all bridges, right? So in my time as a student at the UW, I reached out and built relationships with folks in Jobs with Justice, which used to be based in King County. And there I met awesome folks in Unite here who are doing community organizing work. And we asked for solidarity and back and forth, right? And then after I graduated, I went into nonprofit work. It was soul crushing and very difficult. It wasn't challenging the power structures in our society, right? So I reached back out to my Unite Here friend and asked her, you know, how can I get involved? How can I learn from you? How can I intern, right? And then she put me on research, new development research with her to look at new hotels being built in Seattle, and if there's any leverage we can have to win the union there, right? And I was doing that for a few months, and there was a job that opened up, and I applied and I got it. It was a boycott organizer 9 years ago. And because I had that friendship, that relationship, and also that experience researching, and that my union also reached out and had solidarity opportunities for students as well.
Thanks so much, Eunice. Does anybody else want to jump in and share their sort of like initial path to working in labor?
Hey, this is Guillermo. I also went to UW, graduated in 2018, LSJ and the political science department. For me, the introduction was Union Summer, and I did Union Summer 2 times. It was a very good development opportunity. For me, I think I was might have been like 19 or 20 when I did it. So I think I got a really good head start. And then I always tell folks, but I graduated from UW when I did 9 internships before I left UW. And it put me in a really good place to meet people. But I also knew that I had the backing of the university. So if I failed, I could just do school. So, but it was a very intentional move that I made. And then in doing Union Summer, you get exposed to knocking doors, making phone calls, meeting folks that are running for public office. And I was able to meet Pedro, who was at Teamsters 117, and was running for city council in Burien. And so it was a mixture of getting involved in labor, but also getting involved in local politics and getting the right people elected.
Thanks so much, Guillermo. Does anybody else want to jump in as well?
Yeah, I want to second the Union Summer shout out. That's also how I got involved in labor in Seattle. It's I think a 2.5 month internship. You get paid, which is that was surprising for me coming out of public health at UW too. And you get to meet a ton of different people through different locals. And when I started at Union Summer, I definitely knew I wanted to work in the labor movement, and I was trying to figure out which local I wanted to work for. And everyone that's part of Union Summer is really open to getting coffee with you, sitting down and really talking through what their experience is and what the local is like. So we'll definitely recommend, but also you don't have to go to Union Summer to have those conversations. And you can always, I think in general, I found people in labor are very open to getting that cold text or cold email and sitting down to chat.
Great, thanks so much, Ada. And just in case folks haven't seen, Casey posted in the chat some more resources on Union Summer. So if that's something that you're interested in, there's a link down there. Also, speaking of Casey, we wanted to take some time before we go on to the next question to let Casey introduce herself and her position. So Casey, would you mind hopping on and introducing yourself?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Sai. Thank you to everyone at the Bridges Center and fellow panelists. This is, I was really looking forward to today, seeing it on my calendar, so I can't believe we're here. Well, my name is Casey. I use she, her pronouns. Ganesh Chish, Hinshuat Yuchat Duasak, Kaichenach, Casey Marita Pereira Yuchat Duasak. I thank the indigenous peoples whose land I'm joining you all from, Muckleshoot. I lift my hands to honor their tribe, their people. And I also shared my Tlingit name, which is Hinshuat, which means water woman. And I work at the Washington State Labor Council, Director of Racial and Gender Justice. Prior to that, I was the organizing director at UFCW, now Local 3000. I think I saw a member in the chat, woot woot. And I guess I can do a little bit of answer for the question too, because my introduction to the labor movement, I think, was a little bit distinct. Both of my parents growing up in the Seattle area were union members. So my mom was a seamstress with the United Food and Commercial Workers, and my dad worked various jobs with like the city, the state, and other positions with like public sector unions. So they would do things like, you know, drag me out of bed at like 4 in the morning and be like, there's a picket line. Seattle Times workers are on strike, or Boeing workers are on strike. We gotta go. And, you know, as a little kid, I was half awake and gloomy Seattle rain heading out to a picket line wasn't like the thing I would necessarily look forward to. But in hindsight, I just have so much appreciation for my parents and sharing with me what it means for working people to stand up in solidarity. So I ended up working in retail as soon as I turned 16, and I went to UW also and worked like 3 jobs to make ends meet. And I actually didn't finish school. So that was like in 2001, which was like right after 9/11 and everything. But I guess what got me into a paid position was both the labor program at the University of Washington. There was a paid course learning, student learning, I think is what it was called. So I got to work and get credit for class. And so I got introduced to OPIU, Local 8. I also see some members on the line. That was the first union that like paid me to help out in the office with their organizing team. And then later with my home local, UFCW 1001 at the time. I'll talk about it a little bit more, but those like little internships and then also salting is what really got me introduction into like the work of like professional union organizing.
Thanks so much, Casey. Thanks for the introduction as well as your response to the question. Moving on to another question, thinking about joining the labor movement and what that work is like. Another question that we wanted to pose to the panelists is, what do folks need to be cognizant of when entering the labor movement or considering it? For example, diverse mindsets of the degree to which someone is committed to the labor movement, or balancing different ideas within working in the labor movement. And following that, what advice would you give to prospective workers that are considering this work and considering being a part of the labor movement?
So I'll start with this one. And I came to the labor movement more by accident, for lack of better phrasing. I, grew up with very much the social justice, anti-racism, community movement, but not specifically, not labor, focused on racial justice. And it was as I was graduating from law school, I saw that the NLRB was hiring. And so I was like, perfect. They don't require a whole bunch of different things. I'm just going to put in the application cover letter and that's it. And I went to the interview and, I got it and was with the labor board for 6 years before going into private practice. Shortly before joining, for a very short time period before joining the union. So I didn't come at labor or come to labor from that, passion standpoint. If anything, my passion was more, as I said, community, racial justice, and then employee, plaintiff side employee law. So it aligns, but not labor in and of itself. And so one of the things that I have seen, observed, and experienced has been the, kind of like a litmus test of, are you passionate enough to be here or to be in this space? And so it's something, I think we all need to respect the various roles and aspects that it takes to make the movement a movement. We're not like a monolith, and sometimes we do get into kind of that righteous mind space of what we're doing to the exclusion of others that may just be, for lack of better phrasing, babes in the process of figuring it out. So I think that, would be my thought in terms of just when entering that environment, because of the diversity that is there in experience and passion, we need to be mindful of each other in the space itself, and not the members that we represent, not the members that we're working for, but also those that are doing the work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrice. Does anybody else want to jump in on this question?
I feel like two things that came up when I was first thinking about staffing or like being staff at a labor union is I guess like before I kind of had a vision of what an organizer or someone who works in the labor movement should be like someone very extroverted, someone who's like comfortable and confident on a bullhorn or like making speeches. And I think like just through more conversations with people, that's like not true. I'm very introverted, and you can still be an organizer, you can still work in the labor movement, being introverted, being someone who likes Excel spreadsheets. That was a stereotype I had that like kind of prevented me at first. And yeah, there's a lot of ways to be in the labor movement and contributing. And then I think the other thing that came up is, like, to be very frank, like there are bosses in the labor movement as well. And if you're interested in working at a labor union, I would recommend talking to someone who's on staff that's not in a hiring or firing position, and having like those questions about like culture and good practices. Generally, working in the labor movement requires long hours and commitment, and that's what your bosses will tell you. But we also need this work to be sustainable and for people to be able to draw boundaries and like stay in this movement, so we're not continually churning through people.
Thanks, Ada. Yeah, I feel like in discussions leading up to this event, something that was uplifted through conversation is how to center on the whys of our work, but also acknowledge that this work is hard. And so I'm wondering if folks have any experiences or a favorite campaign that really solidifies that sort of why for them, despite the work being, really challenging, demanding a lot, oftentimes maybe even demanding too much, and how you navigated that, and what the whys of your work are.
So I'd say, for me, especially with the drivers union being such a new organization, I wasn't there for the building of it, like it was years in the making with, you know, the drivers that were affected and 117, you know, put in their political capital, in, you know, sweat in, but seeing, you know, drivers coming in and, you know, in shock or angry because they've been, you know, kicked off their platform and knowing that, you know, 2 years ago, they wouldn't have they wouldn't have way of getting back on. And now they come in, they see an office that actually provides them this representation. And there's been a lot of times where we've had drivers get back on the platform before they leave the office. We did that at the clinic the other night, and one of the drivers, you know, literally, like, he started crying and he hugged the student that was helping him with him. And he's like, you guys don't understand the things that we deal with as drivers, because the driver community is very much the, you know, cross section, like a very immigrant heavy population. And this is what they do. They do not have a backup plan that they can go do, you know, something else. So, you know, it's seeing that effect, a lot of the annoyances and the anger, and having, you know, days like today where I didn't get a chance to eat anything, but, you know, just a few minutes before we started, it's stuff in your face, like that makes, you know, it helps to bring it back to reality, because the reality, a lot of, you know, we're in the labor movement, we do have a certain level of privilege. Regardless of where we're on that ranking, we have the privilege that, you know, our members and those that we serve don't. So being able to see that sometimes is a really nice reset, in the midst of the fight, because we can get caught up in the fight and forget, you know, not pay attention to the true lives behind it. So seeing that is something that brings me back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrice. I really appreciate that perspective and taking a step back. Does anyone else have any final thoughts to add to this question before we move on?
This is Guillermo. I think that the work is hard, but like it's okay that the work is hard. Like, I mean, once you're like been in the game, like you know what you signed up for, you know, and like yes, it can be hard, but like there's things that you can do to like be okay. These are like these are good paying jobs, and like we're in a, like somebody said, like we're in a position of privilege, so we got to do our best, because the bosses are fucking organized and they're gonna go continue to try to screw the workers over. So but with that said, I think one of the most inspiring campaigns I worked on was Industrial Container Services. I see Matt Lim on the call. He hears about ICS a lot. He's one of our members, but this is a predominantly Latino workforce, like in their, I would say like 45 to their 65. Like these are older folks. Like there's some, although there's some more younger folks there now, but like there's an immigrant workforce, and their employer tried to like have the immigration chip above them, and they canceled our negotiations. Actually, we had to cancel because they wanted to run an audit right before we started negotiating. Basically checking people's papers. But we told them to fuck off, and we said that they could not do that. And we organized. They're a militant group. They're a group that does work that I think a lot of folks wouldn't do, putting themselves in danger, cleaning containers, like, you know, gasoline, like whatever was in these containers to be recycled. And there's going to be a lot of health like issues that they're going to have down the line. And the employer did not want to recognize that. But we organized, we marched on the boss, we reached out to Councilmember Mosqueda, like we did everything we could within our 117, but also like the broader labor community. And this was a fight that the folks agreed was one that was righteous, and they got to a contract. They got to the best contract that they could have gotten, and we got some like groundbreaking immigrant rights language in their contract. But this was a group that prior to organizing, they were drinking yellow water. Like they literally had no rights in the workplace, but they got together. And now they're ready for whatever comes along the way with the employer. And things like that is what makes me want to stay in the labor movement.
Thank you, Guillermo. Awesome. Okay, so moving on to our next question, I wanted to pose to the panel. What sort of experiences did you feel were necessary to prepare you for your current role? And how would you encourage others who don't necessarily resonate with that type of experience or pathway to prepare and build those types of necessary experiences? And also, this is an opportunity to plug as well. So if you know of any programs or opportunities that currently exist for students or community members to show up and engage in union or labor organizing, please feel free to mention that as well. I know Union Summer has been mentioned several times and is an incredible opportunity and program that's available to folks that are interested in organizing and working in the labor movement. But if you have any other resources on hand, please feel free to share that as well.
I can start. This is Morgan. So just like my comrade Eunice over here, I was in USAS at the University of Washington for 4 years, and I worked for USAS nationally for 2 years. And if you're not already plugged into that organization at your campus at the UW, I definitely encourage you to do so. That's where I learned everything that I needed to become an organizer. I joked that that was actually my major in college at the UW and not actually history and LSJ. I studied USAS, paid off, here I am. But seriously, organizing as a college student is truly amazing because you're not necessarily confined in the way that a union might be to trying exciting tactics and building power. You kind of have a lot of space to try out different things with the risk being a little bit lower. I was actually arrested twice at the University of Washington as part of our, with Eunice, as part of our coalition work, kicking out Sodexo in solidarity with food service workers. And, you know, in a college campus, you're a little bit more protected, right? You have a little bit more privilege. And so we got to try really cool things, drop banners off buildings, disrupt big events, you know, build coalitions across campus that then did rallies and marches. And that was a really cool space to practice. And by the way, really fun. Some of my best memories are organizing as an undergrad and organizing campaigns. And it's just the best place to learn. And then I think you'll find when you do work in the labor movement, you might have more limitations because there's more laws restricting what unions and union members can do. But I really encourage people to organize as an undergrad. If not with USAS, I'm biased with any other organization that might be at your campus that's running campaigns, and make mistakes. Like, you know, try a campaign, and it's okay if you're not successful, but take risks and try things out. And I think that you can't go wrong if you're working with workers on your campus and trying to build something together. So I would definitely recommend that if you're not already plugged into a student group. And then lastly, the thing, I live in LA now, but the thing I miss most about living in Seattle is how many actions and rallies and solidarity events are happening in Seattle. And I feel like every weekend that I lived there, there was always a protest against Amazon or against the government, at the time it was Trump. There's always a way to plug in. I know people have put stuff in the chat about Starbucks Workers United, and you know, there's so much organizing happening. Just showing up is a really good place to start too. I don't really know the calendar of events in Seattle anymore, but I'm sure someone on this call does. And there's always ways to plug in and show up in your free time and support workers. And I think that's also a really good place to see how this work is done and how power is built, and you know, and get to meet people who are doing this work in the community.
Thanks so much, Morgan.
Morgan, you are missed. And also it's awesome to stay connected and see what people are doing in places like Los Angeles, California. I was also going to answer this question in terms of experiences to prepare me for this role. I think the short version is a combination of being authentic to my lived experience and the experience of, you know, my family, my ancestors, my mother, my aunties. And then also, you know, I don't think I would be able to be in the labor movement if I wasn't, and I didn't see myself as a worker. You know, starting work at the age of 16, I worked in like a factory, I worked in retail, I worked at the Bon Marché, which is union, it's now known Macy's. And I think knowing the work that our members did is, I think, the single piece that I don't ever take for granted, in that, you know, doing the work of, you know, working in our local grocery stores, working at the local retailers. And I think everything that we learned, particularly through the COVID-19 pandemic, has just taught us how crucial and important every single job is. And that there is so much to learn, and that the answers are within working people themselves. And I think that working for a union is unique in that, you know, I like to live every minute of every day that I'm working as, you know, I'm accountable to our members, right? Because what other organization can you work for that's, you know, of, by, and for working people, where people are, you know, paying a portion of their paycheck, you know, their hard-earned, you know, livelihood to go into collective power for themselves and their coworkers. And like us as union staff, it's absolutely a privilege and it's an honor to be able to do this. Like, I can't tell you how many times I'm like, whoa, I get to do this as a job. And reflect back also on my time, you know, when I was working at a non-union retailer and organized a union at my workplace with my coworkers, and how I got treated and the pressure from management, and the stress of having to juggle multiple jobs. Like, that life experience made what I do today possible. And also, I think it's been mentioned, but also shout out and happy Black History Month. We can celebrate Black history today and every day of the year. But I think looking at the roots and the origins of like why and how many of us from like Black and Indigenous backgrounds may have historically been excluded from our organizations at one point in time, and then now are in leadership positions or staff positions. That's another thing that just, I think every single one of us, and young workers especially, it's like, organize, keep going, because that's the best experience that we can bring to this movement.
Thanks so much, Casey. And also just naming all of the like individual experiences that we bring to this movement, enriching our work so much as well. So absolutely agree.
Yeah, I wanted to speak up and echo what Morgan and Casey said. Like, both of all the things they said are true. And I can speak, you know, as my experience as a student and as a worker as well, right? Like, if you're on the student community at the UW, you have this enormous privilege for a very short amount of time, right? Where else basically you pay your tuition, right, to the school, and you have and they should be accountable to you, right? And that's why we're able to win against Sodexo, a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation, by exercising our privilege as students on campus, right? Supporting these workers who are making poverty wages, win the right to a union or the right to organize a union, right? That was like so incredibly powerful. And so speaking of like, current opportunities for solidarity, right? So my union is Unite Here, the Hospitality Workers Labor Union, and we recently organized homegrown sandwich workers into the union, which is really exciting. And they make and they sell like sandwiches under the Toasty, Shine, Molly's, and Bolt brands. And we're fighting for a first contract right now. And there are some solidarity opportunities, especially for folks in the UW community. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat to a petition you can sign, but also we'd love to connect with some student groups in solidarity, right? Because of all the unique privilege you have on campus. So I'm going to drop the petition in the chat, and I can also email it out after. I know that Sai is organizing a recap email, and then also put my phone number as well. Also wanted to lift up, I see UFCW has an organizing academy in the chat. That's really exciting. And we're also like in Unite here in hospitality, right? We're also currently tackling companies, right? Like being a worker myself, like to unpacking like my experience working non-union retail, non-union restaurants, right? I worked at the cancer care clinic through the UW. Really understanding that and realizing that the treatment that we get as workers, as a woman worker myself, as an Asian worker, was not okay, right? And organizing and standing up against that, right? And so Casey mentioned salting, right, which is where you get a job intentionally at a non-union place to organize it underground, right, to join a union. And my union is currently tackling companies that claim to run Seattle and have a lot of money, but have on the opposite side low-wage jobs that cause instability in our society. So I'd like Ada said, I'm totally down to get coffee or anything super casual. So I'm going to put my info in the chat, but we'd love to get involved in the movement and meet you. So
Cool. Thanks so much, Eunice, and thanks for uplifting that in the chat as well. Just continuing to build off of these opportunities, are there any other pathways for exposure and experience that currently exist for younger people and people who are new to labor? And that's like including things that are directly related to labor or things that prepare you for that experience, like student organizing that's not directly labor associated, or other campaigns that folks can show up for. And I think I want to plug James specifically for this question and ask what opportunities you know of too that the LRIC is working on or that you've also experienced too in your own organizing journey.
Yeah, so I come from my background's a little bit different, and I'm actually not an organizer per se. I'm a labor educator. And I think this is a really good question, and it was one that like stood out to me because I think the answers are kind of not super obvious a lot of the times. I think we're still definitely figuring it out as a movement. I had the same question years ago when I was trying to figure out how to connect the community organizations that I was working with to organize labor. And this is still very much a thing that I'm trying to figure out as I'm like exploring the labor movement here. But I think one thing that's really important to remember is that the rank and file of our unions are at the forefront of this movement. So if you really want to like work in labor, one of the best things you can do is just get involved with the union at your own workplace. I know not all workplaces are unionized, and it's a huge lift to start a union. There are resources for that. But if you're able to, joining your union and taking up responsibilities as a member or as a steward is like one of the best ways to cut your teeth on what it means to be a labor activist. I also know that it's a bit ironic for me to be advocating for this because it was definitely not my experience. I didn't come up as an organizer in labor, but I came up as an organizer with Anak Bayan, which is a community political organization that represents the youth sector of the revolutionary movement of the Philippines. And so we do a lot of political education and community like building to support those efforts and educate people about what's going on there. And the connections to, you know, the fascism in the Philippines, to, you know, the kinds of forces that oppress workers in the US, because it's all kind of the same beast, right? But yeah, again, I didn't get into labor by becoming a steward in my own union. My path looked really different, but the way I see it, workers are at the center of the movement because they know their conditions best, and staff, like everyone here on the panel, are here mainly to support that kind of development for members rather than centering ourselves. And we can think about kind of recent local labor struggles like the UW postdocs and researchers that are doing a strike vote right now. And, you know, we can see the hard work of the rank and file at the center of everything that is propelling this movement. But that said, a robust and vibrant labor movement takes all kinds, right? And so there are so many needs in our movement for people interested in working as staff or as educators or researchers. You know, it's not just, you know, the rank and file, but admittedly, these pipelines are not super clear. And we've mentioned Union Summer. I know BAM If y'all want to speak a little bit more on that, is one more avenue. At the LERC, one thing that we're working on is a series in March, which is basic stewardship training. So just how to be a good steward. It goes through the basics of like the responsibilities of a steward and things like wine garden rights and organizing around certain issues. And I can send a link in the chat in a bit. Oh, well, Alex beat me to it. Registration is open. It'll be going all through March. So if you want to learn more about what it means to be a union activist in your own union, it's a great place to start. But I do want to invite folks to talk a little bit about BAM or Union Summer. We've mentioned it a little bit more, but if there's more that we can share about it, I definitely want to uplift those. I think maybe one more thing I want to share is something called Yell. It's a program that we're developing at LERC. It's been done before, so we're developing the next cohort. One disclaimer is this is not exactly for, people new to labor. Mainly the demographic that we're looking for this cohort are people that have some experience in the rank and file, some experience being stewards or union activists and looking for the next step. But wanted to put that out there in case some of those people are in the room. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much, James. And yeah, happy to talk about BAM. We might save some of that for the end just to make sure we get through the questions, but we'd be super happy to talk more about it or share some more information about it towards the end. But I would love to invite Amy also to speak to this question as well. I know that Amy knows of some really rad opportunities for folks to engage.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, folks. Amy here with Apollo. We are a constituency group with the AFL, and I currently serve as the co-chair of our National Apollo Young Leaders Council. So it's a council that actually was created back in 2012, and we exist for young leaders who are emerging in the labor movement, whether you are new or just want to get involved with labor, as a space for folks to just learn about opportunities that exist. We are a national council, so we cover folks from all across the state, but it is for leaders or community supporters, allies who are 35 and under who want to get involved somehow but don't have a avenue, whether it's in their city or whether it's in their union, but just a space for us to kind of create an agenda and create programs that are really designed for young folks and the issues that are impacting us today. We were created back in 2012. But, as the issues and as the climate has changed in our last 10 years, we've adapted as a Young Leader Council to really create a space for new members to come in, to create a program, to share their thoughts, what's happening in their union or what's happening there in their city locally, to be able to create programs. We've done organizing institutes where folks from all different walks of life, whether you have experience with organizing or not, can learn about tools to be able to continue your work in labor movement or to use that in your community skills, whether it is labor related. And we've been able to create summits through the years, workshops and trainings to really be focused on young leaders who don't have a space or an outlet to come to, but want to get more involved and connected through us as a constituency, because we do work labor adjacent to the unions and support all the organizing that is happening with all the different unions, and want to be able to help folks get plugged in. And also another pathway is that people have been saying contact them. So, don't be hesitant right now to take the information that's in the chat. Feel free to reach out and do cold calls. It's important that these folks exist. And if you want to get involved, just give them a shout. And they'll be happy to have coffee and chat more about the direction. So. And I'll drop in the chat more information about Young Leaders Council if y'all want to get involved, a way to connect.
Thanks so much, Amy, and everyone for all of these really rad resources and places to look after this event, if you're interested in getting involved. Also, I'm sure, like any one of us on the panel too, would be happy to connect and replug these opportunities. So, if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to me or Rachel. If you're interested in the specific work of any of the panelists, we'll also try to connect to you as well. So that's just an ongoing conversation we'd like to be having with folks. But I think I'll go ahead and pass the mic to Rachel for our remaining questions.
Thank you, Sai, and want to echo thank you everyone for sharing resources and for your really thoughtful answers and conversation so far. So kind of connected to what we've already been talking about, and I've heard almost everyone bring this up, is when we think about like our whole personhood, not just ourselves working in the labor movement potentially, but just everything, what are some of the organizations or groups that are really doing phenomenal work in the community that you've had the opportunity to collaborate with or hope to do so in the future? So this really kind of blends in with what we were just talking about. Can I have a panelist jump in for that?
Yeah, I can talk about a little bit. Yeah, because my background, again, coming from more of a community organizing perspective, I definitely want to boost the work of, the organization that kind of raised me, which is Anak Bayan. It's part of, it's just the youth sector of the bigger contingent of that kind of organizing, the larger organization being Bayan. And then there's the women's sector, which is Gabriela, and the migrant sector, Migrante. So doing excellent work, still very much in community with those folks. And I just also want to encourage that, if you have an interest in labor, you don't know where to start, but you want to just use your energy and get some skills. Joining one of these organizations is a great way to do it. As people have said before, even if it's not directly with labor, you're going to meet people, you're going to learn, the skills of something like facilitation or teaching, or, even just the soft skills of interacting with people in an organizing space. All that stuff is so valuable and super translatable when you do find yourself working in more of a labor context. Also want to boost, folks have brought up USASP, but also some other campus orgs I know at UW. We have a chapter there at Anak Bayan, but also SUPER, which is a Palestinian, well, I can't remember what it stands for, but yeah, pro-Palestinian organization, as well as SJP. And then kind of more the mutual aid world, all over Seattle, there's a lot of really great work. Definitely want to boost the work of the CID Coalition. So those are folks in the Chinatown International District. I know that they're spearheading a lot of the anti-gentrification work there. Egg Rolls, big shout out to Egg Rolls. That's the meal service group that does meal services every Sunday out of Chuman Tofu Deli. It's a great spot. It's one of my favorites in town. And it's just a really great place to meet people and give back to the community. Yeah, and I think maybe the last two ones I'll boost are also mutual aid oriented. The PHRA, which is the it's People's Harm Reduction Alliance, I think. I've been seeing a little bit more of their work recently and really inspired by what they've been doing. And then following the Stop the Sweeps page, which is, anti-unhoused kind of action-oriented group that's on Instagram, posting on Instagram and elsewhere, but yeah, doing really good stuff in the community. But yeah, if anyone else has other things to boost, and I can type these out in the chat because I know I said a lot of words and acronyms. Yeah.
I would just add not a specific organization, but I would just look at this upcoming, we have elections coming up, and in South King County specifically, sometimes we forget to give love to South King County, but we've done a lot of really good work, flipping Burien, flipping SeaTac, and I would just say show up and knock doors. That's one really good way to get involved. Get a packet, hit your turf, have conversations with voters, and I mean you're bound to meet labor folks there. You might even knock doors for for a union member that's running for office. But that's really, really important, especially for the folks that are still at the university. I know that it's a grind. I know it's hard, but it's important that you show up, Saturday morning, wherever in South King County you want to show up to, and get involved there. Also, one thing that I want to lift, that we organize Climate Pledge Arena. So that's a Teamster job, and they're making really good money for the industry. They're top in the industry right now. So if you're you know what, maybe I don't want to work for a union at this point, but I want to have a union job, and I'm thinking about becoming a steward, that's a really good place to go. You show up, you tell people where to sit, you get to watch concerts, and it's a union job, and it's a good opportunity for your development. And then if you're like, you know what, I did a kick-ass job here, let's go organize the rest of the stadiums, then let's do that too.
Thank you.
On
both
that side, sorry, one more. It just is you guys were talking. Drivers Union is actually looking to hire part-time receptionists that we're paying $25 an hour. It is Monday through Friday, 12 to 5 p.m. So for any student interested that has the flexibility, and it does come with benefits. So you do get insurance, etc. That we're currently recruiting for. So it is something, for those that may not be fully aware, Drivers Union, as I said, we represent Lyft and Uber drivers. So we are making that leeway into the gig economy, which does not fit traditional labor standards of employees versus, someone being an employee in order to qualify under a union. So we are doing work that is still within, still employing labor concepts, but trying to address it for the economy in which we are facing and where we seem to be headed, because of the exploitation, I should say, of companies now. So that is another, another way you would get, some insight into what we are doing. I was just looking at it, unfortunately, like where we posted, it's expired, but I'll put my information in the chat and you guys can, because I don't remember email address offhand. So I'll put my email address and information in the chat, and then you guys can reach out if you have any interest. But by the time you're doing the email, Rachel and Sai, I'll give you the appropriate email address to put out there.
Thank you all. I know this is a really popular one, and I think that's great. So please, does anybody else of the panel want to jump in and share organizations you've had the opportunity to work with or that you know of that you would suggest that folks get plugged into?
This is more in the political space, but Transit Riders Union, they do really amazing work. They are running our current campaign in Renton right now to raise the minimum wage, which is really important. So, and they have really just great work and great connections. And then I think DSA is worth a shout out. They also do really interesting and important work in Seattle and moving the Seattle politics left. And also a great place to get connected to people and electoral campaigns.
I will just also quickly add that, for folks who, want to get involved in labor movement, join constituency groups like APALA, APRI, A. Philip Randolph Institute, Puget Sound Chapter, CBTU, which is the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, LACLA, which is the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, and other constituency groups that, we don't necessarily aren't unions, but we work labor adjacent and we support everything that all the unions here do and, the labor movement as a whole. So thanks for dropping constituency groups.
Thank you all for sharing in the chat and out loud, of course. This is really, Amy, I wonder if I can have you speak a little bit. I'm going to have a couple of other folks too, but this blends really well with what you were just sharing into our next question, which is for those of you on the panel who are not directly in a union setting, what are some of the ways that you built relationships with unions, and what advice do you have for others who are in or want to be in a non-union labor role?
Yeah, absolutely. So reiterating, APALA and the other constituency groups listed are labor adjacent. So we're affiliated with the AFL-CIO, but we are not union exactly. We are membership based. For both union members, community group members, and anyone who is really here to advocate for workers' rights. And so, we have the privilege to be able to show solidarity and support, again, to union actions and anything that is happening within the labor movement. And I think, you know, if we're being real about it, sometimes it is difficult to know how to navigate and where to begin, because labor unions are so big and you're like, well, who is the connect? How do I figure it out, right? I can look on a staff sheet, right, and be like, oh, this is a person who's the community organized, but you know, how do you connect? And it can be like cold calling and being really like, hey, I'm with so-and-so, and just kind of doing that outreach, because sometimes, you know, labor unions are really focused on their members and providing resources and developing their agenda. And so, you know, reiterating that, you know, groups like Apala and other constituency groups are here to support the work that they're already doing, and really being able to create even more resources and tools for their members to not only grow as leaders in their union, but also, and then result as leaders in their community, right? Because everybody identifies with multiple hats when they step out of their workplace, right? And so how do we strengthen their toolkit and their resource belt with even more resources to fight for better working standards, but also better community for them and their families. And so, you know, power mapping is also another option, right? Connecting with anybody here to like talk about it and how we can work together is also another way. I think it's important to contact, you know, folks who that you already know, and that, you know, you're able to just then utilize your relationships. We were really want to uplift that is also intention and not impactful, right? The intention that you are reaching out to, you know, support that their work that they're doing, and be mindful of your impact, and, you know, how you show up in those spaces is also very important. And I think just, you know, sometimes it is scary to do a cold call, but I think that's also another important role, is just utilizing your relationships and, you know, connecting with folks that you know, because everybody's connected at some degree. And so how do we connect with folks and be able to power map with them and be able to then, you know, have that conversation maybe with that person, or then follow up after without that your initial connect. So, you know, it could be tough and it takes a long time, but I think, you know, the relationships for non-union groups but want to work in the labor space is important to develop those relationships, and it can take time. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's just really making sure that relationship is continuing to be developed, strengthened, to be more than transactional and open to a two-way street. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. I think that time and the not transactional is stuff that I really relate to, and really appreciate you naming that. I'm wondering if I can also invite James to jump into this question as well.
On building relationships with unions within organizations, right? Yes. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is something that I struggled to make connections in, like in my organizing experience before I got this job. But I really kind of just resonate with like the back to basics of just like showing up at events and like talking to folks and meeting people. You know, sometimes it's as simple as just showing up on a strike line and, you know, introducing yourself and just being present, you know, and being a face that people recognize, right?
Thank you, James. I think that's really important.
Mhm.
And Morgan, I'm wondering if I can have you talk a little bit about your past with USAS on this as well.
Yes, wait, will you clarify what you mean?
That's a fair question to ask. So thinking about when you're not working at exactly like a union setting, but you're collaborating with unions quite a bit. I know you and I have talked in the past about how sometimes that would work really well, and sometimes it was hard on timelines for both sides. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I think it can be challenging, but I think that the best campaigns, the most powerful campaigns are when, you know, students, workers, different community groups are building power together. And I think that, you know, the first step is always just to build relationships, to just, you know, talk to each other about what your issues are, what's going on with, you know, with your union and your workplace, and see if there are ways that you can collaborate. And I think that as a student, I found that there was a lot of ways that we had power, given that we were, students paying tuition at an institution that had a lot of contracts with big companies. You can sit down and think about all of the business relationships that a university has, whether that be in athletics, whether that be outsourcing food service, outsourcing parking vendors, right? There's a lot of relationships there, sponsorships. And then also thinking about the fact that, universities are often one of the largest employers in their state, especially big universities like the University of Washington. And so, sort of thinking about how your role as a student can affect change, and how students can speak up to demand that the university be accountable either for its own workforce or for the workers that are employed by the companies that they have business relationships with. And that's a lot of what we did in USAS. I think what USAS is still up to, right, is holding companies and the university accountable through, and the first step to doing that is just building relationships with workers and having meetings, getting coffee, and talking about how you all can partner up. Of course, when you work with a union, sometimes there are some challenges. Unions, are groups of workers that work full-time. Sometimes workers have, multiple jobs that people have talked about on this call. And so recognizing that they sometimes have their own pace. They're also, as I said, sort of governed by labor law, which can be restrictive. But, students have a lot of power to I think it's important to build those relationships and also take the lead of the workers who are often putting themselves on the line, taking the risk, speaking up on behalf of their coworkers, which can be a really scary thing to do, and sort of making sure to follow the lead of the workers who are and the union members that are leading their campaign. And we did this, a bunch when I was in USAS. We organized campaigns against Nike and Adidas, Sodexo, supported TAs, grad students, custodians, faculty, all the folks that make the university run. And we did a lot of amazing work to build power on campus and hold the UW accountable in ways that they were otherwise not prepared to do.
Great. Thanks everybody for sharing. Appreciate that. So moving on to, we're about to wrap up our kind of facilitated questions and go into Q&A, which I'm really excited about. But thinking about just where we're at now as the whole labor movement and your role in it, as well as what you know about what's happening in this area and around the country and around the world, what are your hopes for the labor movement of the future? And kind of how do you think we can get there?
I can jump in again. So I think that there's a lot of things that unions have done that are tried and true that are really successful and have been effective. And I would say that that's not the only way that we can get our work done. I think a lot of people probably have heard that organizing is an art form and not a science. And although there are ways that the labor movement has been successful in running campaigns and organizing, there's so much more that we have to explore. And by the way, we have to keep up with technology. Organizing in 1965 is not the same as it's organizing in 2023. I personally need to learn how to use TikTok. I think if I'm going to continue to be a successful organizer, I don't know how to use TikTok. I know, but right, we have to adapt. We have to adapt to technology and ways that people communicate, and we have to adapt to how corporations are changing and how their structure is changing. When Uber and subcontracted workers started to become more common, right? The labor movement had to adapt. And so with that, I think there's just not one way that we can organize. There are so many ways. And to answer your question, Rachel, we need people who want to think about that and take that on. And sometimes, we might be told that things aren't possible, but we need people who want to try things anyway and come up with new ideas and organize people into these new types of campaigns that we can run. And I'd say that I feel like I've been able to do that lately. Just last year, I represent resident physicians at LA County Hospital. There's about 1,400 of them. And I got to work with our members in basically building towards a strike, and we were 2 days away from going on a strike. It would have been the first strike of resident physicians in 30 years. And I got a lot of people telling me that it wasn't possible along the way because it hadn't been tried, and that's just not what we do. But our members were really committed and really dedicated. I'm frankly beyond fed up. I mean, given the fact that they are frontline providers and they just got through COVID, and most of them hadn't gotten a raise in 2 years. They have 6 figures of educational debt. If you have any friends that work in medicine, they are very familiar with the exploitation that is the residency residents in this country. But we didn't have to go on strike, but we did build towards a strike and got 48 hours away from actually shutting down all the county hospitals in Los Angeles. And as a result, won $20,000 in increases for everybody, and the creation of a DE&I fund, which is a $125,000 fund that is controlled by residents to be used to create curriculum for residents around DE&I, and also recruit folks of color and folks from underrepresented communities to be in medicine, because there's a very high bar to enter medicine. So these are the kind of things that we were able to win, and we wouldn't have been able to do it unless we had taken our members out, and gone through a strike vote. And so I'd say that, we need people that want to take on these challenges and try new things and push boundaries and take risks. And I think that's how I hope that that's what the future of the labor movement is, because gosh, employers and companies, corporations are getting really smart. And so we need to outsmart them and out-organize them.
Thank you so much, Morgan. What do other folks think? And to remind, because I know that was a few minutes ago, thinking about the labor movement now and the labor movement of the future and how we can get there. The labor movement we want in the future, to be clear.
I'm, as the labor educator, just like really hoping to see more labor education, especially in high schools, and starting folks out young. There's already more in Washington State than I had where I grew up. I think people are, but also it's generational, right? I think people are a little bit more plugged in, that like labor is a thing. We're living in a moment of, this like resurgence of interest in labor, but we have yet to see it kind of translate to, as big of a upturn in union membership and union activity. So I think starting folks early and getting people exposed to like what it means to like to build a strong local labor movement, and and what that might mean beyond labor, like something in the realm of like social justice unionism and like broader movement building. These are kind of values that we can instill a lot early on. So hoping to see more of that. But also on that note, I think beyond like labor has this history of being a lot more ambitious than it has been in the past, several decades. Labor used to be the forefront of so much social change and social movements. And, if we even look back as recent as like 1999, like the WTO uprising, labor had a huge contingent in that. And so I would love to see our labor movement be more involved and more ambitious and broader social change in the way that we've seen in so much of American history.
Thanks so much, James. Really appreciate that. Kevin, I see your hand raised. I'm going to get to you in just one second. I just want to ask Patrice to talk a little bit about something that we talked about when we were prepping for this, which is kind of the change of, which has already been referenced by others, and including Patrice, as we think about how work is changing, how we can keep up and how we can be thoughtful about that.
I don't remember everything we talked about. But and as you said, this is what Drivers Union is doing, and we were able to do it only through, as we talk about relationship building, only through the relationships that 117 and our driver community had built with other organizations, and some of them there were other union organizations that were not in favor of what we were looking to get done and looking to pass. And so when we talk about what to expect, one of the first questions we asked or we addressed on the panel is discussing what does that look like? There were a number of organizations that, you know, from our perspective, you know, put their necks out because they insisted and recognized the need for what we are doing, because the, you know, drivers federally are not recognized as employees. And so you're not employees, you don't get worker rights. And, you know, the what is taking place now, and we see it within the driver community. There are some that they're like, nope, we're employees, point blank, period, that's it. Because there's so much control over what we're doing. And you have others that will say, there's no way in hell I'm an employee. I'm a small business person. And yes, I want the rights, you know, attached to it. So how we have to think about how we are going to bridge that gap. And make that, ensure that we don't get into, or, you know, somewhat get lost into the quagmire of employee independent contractor, because I see that as something that companies are using to divide, you know, labor and to distract from getting the rights that are needed. So you have to be innovative in the approach that is taken, with, you know, the collaboration of the various relationships we have. We're able to get not just the Seattle ordinance passed as a first step. Now we have a statewide ordinance for any driver that provides services within Washington. So you could have Oregon drivers that are coming in, you know, from the airport, and they would now be protected if they're deactivated. So it's something that, so that's the non-traditional part, because we have legislative protections in place. But we also have the mix of a traditional union, because people can pay to be members, and there are additional benefits that come with being a member, you know, of drivers union. So we do definitely have to think outside the box as to how do we address it, because at the end of the day, it is about substantive worker rights, and anyone performing work is, you know, I'm pretty sure I'm preaching to the choir here, deserves the dignity of respect and being able to earn that, you know, that living wage, being able to say something and have recourse when they've been, you know, excuse the language, fucked over. So we have to think beyond what we are used to, because we are not, I think Morgan said it, you know, organizing in not even like organizing in the 90s, organizing in the early 2000s requires different, you know, different ways of thinking. It's you know, the foundations are there, but we need to get creative, because employers are definitely getting creative, or businesses are getting creative in how they avoid, you know, the rules. And if we're depending solely on you know, the traditional, we are going to be left always running to catch up versus setting the pace. So, you know, I think that's why even just having individuals that are new to labor and have experienced these new economies and new, you know, different positions would be helpful, because you bring in a different viewpoint and a different perspective.
Thanks so much, Patrice. I really appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to Ada, who had something quick to add, and then we will transition into questions.
Yeah, this is about, I was just thinking, like the super far future of the labor movement. Like, I personally did not get into the labor movement just to make union jobs like livable, you know, and I also didn't get into the labor movement just to make people who have jobs have a livable wage and like way of life. I think our labor movement needs to be about making sure that everyone has equal access, you know, even if you can't work, even if you don't work, like everyone has a right to live.
Thank you so much, Ada. All right, so I'm going to pin all of our amazing panelists, and I see Kevin's hand up, so we're going to do Kevin first, but we can wait 1 second so I can figure out pinning, which everyone keep your fingers crossed. I've never added more than 2, so I'm going to try my best. Hang on. We'll get there. We'll get there. I know we will. All right, Kevin, if you want to come off mute and ask your question as I continue adding our panelists, that would be wonderful.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be able to hop in. No, I was late because I had to work. But the comment you had about the question about the future of the labor movement, what I'm looking for the future in the labor movement is really change in the structure of leadership and who is the leadership of the union, because it's still predominantly aged, ale, male, and stale, despite some of the changes we may see. And because of that, the culture of that setup makes it harder to even catch the vision that's being talked about here today. But my question is one thing that was mentioned a couple times, the generational perspective and in organizing from the point of view of when I came to work some 50 years ago, started working, it was like, get a job, stay in the job till you retire. Now, the concept is I'm in, I'm out. And in union organizing, even now as a state employee, where people tend to want to stay longer, a lot of the members don't want to invest into leadership or making changes because I'm here, I'm in and I'm out. I'm on to my next phase. My jobs are going to change multiple times. And what it takes to get that commitment to make the change that we need is a long haul struggle. And most people, workers and employers, treat people as in and out. So how do we adjust to that cultural change in organizing and in staying around to make that slow change that often takes years and generations?
Great question. What do we think, panelists? Thanks so much for bringing that into the space, Kevin.
If I heard the end part was how do we change the leadership makeup in that sense?
That's my vision of the future, to get the leadership makeup changed. But there again, to get leadership makeup change goes back to my initial preference. One has to say, I'm going to be invested, committed to staying in this deal for so much time to get to that point. And when you organize, whether it's drivers or even, like postdocs and those type of folks, you have to figure, I'm going into a job I'm going to stay in. And a lot of people don't feel jobs they're taking now are jobs they're going to stay in for the most part in this new gig economy, the new non-traditional economy as I see it. So how do you organize people to want to stay organized and commit to doing what we want to change now, knowing that you have to say, well, I'm not going to put my neck out there because 4 months from now, I'm looking for something else. I'm going to be gone. So why should I invest personally into a campaign? That's the kind of thought that I hear from talking to different folks.
So I'd say a couple of things from the driver community perspective. And I know people go in and out of the gig economy generally. But what we've seen with drivers, we actually have drivers that have been doing so for years. So they do sit in, they do stay in the role because of the flexibility that it provides them. So I think part of it is us tapping into that and, teaching and training what this looks like or what it can look like, consistently, because the individuals are doing it for a period of time. It's just, as you said, it doesn't strike in the traditional sense. one of the things that I see, and I think maybe Rachel, this is what we're talking about when it comes to traditional labor, like we were recruiting for, at the drivers union, we were recruiting for Peggy Brown and Fellows, which, you know, from a law student standpoint, that's kind of like the stamp of approval entering the labor realm from law school. And one of the things that I looked at as someone that is in a role of a decision maker is looking at individuals that have the passion, whether it's because, you know, like Casey, they were workers, and they've seen and they helped, you know, do something in the positions that they were in, but they didn't know about, you know, like what that looked like outside of a legal realm. And it's individuals, you know, that I would say probably would not get a second look at, you know, a bigger labor organization. So we purposely try to give those individuals an opportunity because they need a step in, you know, they have that experience or have that passion, and we want to invite in you know, diverse individuals into these roles so that they can, you know, the leadership will, you know, change at some point with more individuals being invited in where they can. So I think that's also part of our responsibility as those that are currently here, and we recognize this and we see this and see the impact of, you know, the not overly, you know, not cognizant old white male, as you described earlier, Kevin, in leadership, and what that impact has on those that are employees of labor unions. So bringing those individuals into the fold, for lack of better phrasing, and giving them that exposure, you know, helps with it. But I think we have to be cognizant when we are making, you know, some decisions for individuals coming in.
Thanks so much, Patrice. Ada, I think I see your hand up. Jump in.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, it's kind of like a chicken and egg question in that, like, a lot of the places where people can stay for a long time have probably been traditionally union, and places where that have high turnover, in my experience, have been traditionally non-union. I'm thinking of like federally qualified health centers, which we've just started organizing at 1199 Northwest. Like there's a ton of turnover there, but that's because so many federally qualified health centers weren't union. And so I think part of it, especially seeing like Starbucks workers and Amazon workers unionized right now, like these places have such high turnover. So it's up to people who've had the privilege of having union jobs. Like it's up to our unions now to say, like, we need to invest in these new unions. We need to invest in these new ways of working. We need to put the money into developing this campaign and making sure that their first contracts are the first contracts that will inspire other Starbucks workers and Amazon workers to join. So that's been really exciting, and I hope we can see the same thing happen with clinics and healthcare.
Other thoughts on Kevin's question or other things to bring into the space?
I would just add that, like, for folks who, you know, I think part of it also is getting involved with community groups and also kind of groups that they identify with, or like, again, constituency groups. You know, we are open to folks who may not necessarily be part of a union, but they're community allies. So let's say, you know, they are in a union role, but then but leave, or whatever the case is, but they still are supporters and want to show solidarity. Like, you know, that's a space that we think is really important for community and new members to come together as they're advocating for, you know, working standards and a community based resolutions or legislation, whatever the case is, and just like having that as a space for maybe folks to just kind of come to, and then but also, you know, when they get a union job, then kind of be able to get back into the swing of things pretty quickly. And you know, I think it also kind of goes into the idea of like, how do we support members who may not necessarily look like leadership, but then get them into roles and tools and everything they need to be propelled into leadership, which is, really critical with organizations like ours that have that cultural lens and have that understanding of our community to be able to support their development.
Thank you so much, Amy. All right, so we're getting a couple of questions in the chat. Thank you, Kevin, for starting us off. And Liza, would you like me to read this off, or would you like to come off of mute and ask the question to our panel? I also realize I'm asking you that. I'm kind of making it come off mute. All right, so I think I'm going to take that as I will read it, and I apologize for that weird tech snafu. So, can unions build more pathways to grow the career or small business apprenticeship to grow union? So thinking about building pathways and apprenticeship, and if I'm missing anything in that, Lisa, please jump in.
So what I'm basically asking is, I know that in the past, there used to be like apprenticeship programs, like you would start off like in different areas and you could work up to, in the union and stuff. But is there anything for like the Uber drivers and them to have pathways to learn how to be a better business person or something like that, where you can keep people in unions or keep them longer or keep them more involved? Like the guy before said, a lot of people are kind of like just coming and going to jobs, but if you make a pathway, then they're more invested in staying in that job and growing that job, which could be a union job. That's what I was asking.
I can maybe take a crack at this one. Great question, and also welcome other panelists' perspectives. But I think apprenticeships are still in abundance. That's the wonderful thing about working, at least in Washington State. We have some of the most incredible apprenticeships, many in the building trades, but also healthcare. Union members of SCIU, Healthcare 1199 Northwest, developed a training fund that's helping develop not just people that are already in the healthcare field, but are looking to get into. And then also we have the Deep Sea Fishermen's Union that just started an apprenticeship. And then there's a huge directory of all of these things that are also regionally based on, like, for example, where you live or would like to work, perhaps what industry you'd like to get into. And then one of the newer apprenticeships that's coming out is through We Train Washington, which was formed by members of UFCW. I believe their first apprenticeship is to continue building out the meat cutters apprenticeship for folks who do the craft of meat cutting in grocery stores in the Puget Sound, as well as seafood mongering. And I think there's some other retail apprenticeships in the works, which is super exciting. And then also thinking about, and thank you, Rachel, for pre-apprenticeship spaces as well, that's through our community and technical college systems throughout Washington State as well, which I think is just a great opportunity to note that, like, we're talking about youth and students being a part of our labor movement, not waiting for tomorrow, but doing it today. Shout out to folks that are working at Starbucks and Amazon while you're in school. Like, you are our labor movement today and the labor movement of the future. And I think, and Imagine Institute, they're doing such dope work with, like, childcare providers, small business owners that are also predominantly women of color, immigrant women owned businesses, which is so dope. So thank you for all the links in the chat. And then also I'm gonna I think Guillermo shared this earlier, but there's a union jobs listing hosted through MLK Labor. So it's mostly like King County and the surrounding area jobs that are listed there, but it's there's several apprenticeships that are on there too. So want to shout that out as well. And I'll probably copy paste that again.
Thank you so much, Casey, and everyone who shared information in the chat and shared stuff earlier. Anything else to add to this?
Yeah, I can just add a little bit that at the LERC, one of our pieces of focus is just trying to make sure that high schoolers, again, like what I was saying earlier, are aware of apprenticeships as an option. I think that like just expanding the reach of them and like getting them into things as simple as like job fairs or like you know, representation in high schools is really important. And I think that there's also a big appetite for it, especially with, you know, like all the dynamics of class like shifting in the past several years, but also you know, like this kind of realization for a lot of people that maybe a 4-year degree at a liberal arts college is not going to give me the security and like dignity of work that I'm looking for. Yeah.
Thank you for that, James. I think that is really important, and also something I wish I would have had better understanding of when I was growing up on a farm in rural Montana, because there was a lot of opportunities I just didn't know about at the time. So I want to keep us moving. There's another question. Thank you to Emmanuel. Would you like to jump in and ask the question you put in the chat?
Yeah, I can ask my question. Hi, everyone. My name is Emmanuel. I had a question. I was hearing from an earlier response about engaging with different parts of the community. And I was just wondering if there was work, or just wanted to ask if there was work that anyone's doing around Labor to Pulpit, or with other community groups that are out there, and just like what areas do they think we could evolve this work, or how could we evolve Labor to Pulpit and things like that with the next generation and as things develop into different areas.
Great question. Thank you for bringing that into the space. Anybody want to take that on?
I put something in the chat. This is Kevin, and I know you have the panel. I put something in the chat about the A. Philip Randolph Institute and the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, both who have had and still have initiatives, and even working on the National AFL-CIO, as well as the NAACP, building the bridge between the pulpit and organized labor, because lots of times many churches have, especially in the Black church in particular, and I'm sure not exclusively, have had social justice movements that are often historically funded by the members of the pews who are actually workers. A. Philip Randolph, the history of that, has built that tradition from you know, back in the 30s and the 40s on to today. And I know that here in Seattle, the A. Philip Randolph Institute in Seattle has worked with United Black Christian Clergy and Faith Action Network in collaborating on and having social justice ministries at churches. And lots of times your church members are your union members, and you want to keep them working because they can help pay their tithes. So that's always been there, as well as taking the social justice mission. So that's there, as well as organizations like the Poor People's Campaign and Faith Action Network. We've all kind of collaborated together. So I know it's pretty active here in across the country in those constituency groups and in King County.
Thanks so much, Kevin. That's really important to share. I think, I don't know if Ada would want to jump into this too, but I know that SEIU Healthcare 1199 Northwest, as well as UFCW now 3000, formerly 21, did a lot of work with churches and congregations in Pierce County, especially regarding care issues, healthcare issues, and predominantly Catholic institutions such as CHI, but also multi-care. And now CHI is under the bandwidth of Common Spirit. And I feel that a lot of that was our membership, as well as leaders, particularly our Black leadership, doing an amazing job of building those relationships over time. And that wasn't something that came quickly, as our panelists have mentioned earlier. I don't know if you have something more to add to that, Ada, because I've been a little out of the mix for a bit, but really important work that I think that communities matter, and what's happening outside of just our workplace is part of our personhood, and having those connections and making sure that they are not transactional takes time. Does anybody, I see one hand raised. Is there any other thing to add to this important question that Emmanuel brought into the space? All right, I have a raised hand, and tell me if I'm mispronouncing this, but Yesenia, please come off mute if you'd like to and jump in with a question.
Yes, you said it right. My question, I think, is more specifically for Casey, and also shout out Memo. I saw you here. Wanted to say hey. I know you mentioned salting earlier, and I've talked about it with my dad, and it's something I'm like intrigued about. If you have experienced salting, like, can you expand on that? What does it look like? Is that empowering? I don't know. I feel like it's more of an adrenaline rush and kind of like feeding into the passion. I'm just really intrigued about learning more what it looks like.
Yes, and this is also a thing we could take it offline. So I will put my contact info in the chat because this is being recorded. And also want to invite possibly Eunice and any other panelists. But thank you for the question, Yesenia. Always good to see you. And it's complicated, and it really, I will say, depends on like who you're working with. So you know, Unite Here Local 8 is doing some pretty incredible work, taking on some of the biggest corporations in the Pacific Northwest. And I think it's important to note too that like salting is a tactic. So there's plenty of resources on the internet. So if you Google like, what is union salting? Some of it can be really exciting and feel like, you know, undercover work almost. And then some of it can also be very controversial. But I think happy to talk more about my experiences. But I will say what helped me have a very positive experience with as a SALT was being very grounded in why I do the work. And thankfully, I had some pretty incredible organizing mentors at the time that connected my work as a SALT to the larger movement, right? In some cases, as a SALT, it was simply to do kind of like reconnaissance research, learn about the corporate practices and like the real experience of people that work there and my coworkers. And in other places, it was like straight up like, we're forming a union and like, you know, we're utilizing this tactic to assist workers who want to form a union, right? And I think that's the key thing to remember too, like you as a SALT, like no one person can go in and like wave a magic wand and like, this place is now union. Like the best salting experiences are like when you're there to support your coworkers who have, through, you know, identified issues, see collective power and are ready to take it on to the boss and see forming a union as like part of the solution. I think that's the best experience that I've had as a SALT, because it was me supporting my coworkers ultimately, and not like me on a mission to like form the union, as fun as that is too. But I'm happy to talk more. Apologies for keeping it so general. And Eunice, I don't know if there's anything or like other ways that we could connect with people that maybe are interested in salting. Because I think also I know a lot of like militant folks with like DSA and others incorporate that tactic also into like political activism. And so there's various ways to get connected with it. And every organization does it a little different, got a different flavor.
That's awesome, Casey. I thought it was both general but informative. So you got that. You hit both of those really well. Eunice, I'm going to give you a second if you want to jump in. No pressure.
Yeah, second what Casey said, and yeah, like you mentioned, this is being recorded, so please call me and we can talk offline. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad everybody remembers that. Sometimes I'm still like, what? Public records recorded? What? From somebody who did a lot of public records. But anyways, this has been such a great discussion. We have time for one or two more questions if folks have them. So I want to give people some space. I'm going to check the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything. Any other questions for our amazing group here? All right, I think I saw Daisy first. So Daisy, please jump in.
Hello. I introduced myself in the chat really quick, but I am a member of Starbucks Workers United, and I'm just looking for some general like advice, since we have the time, on how to keep some like union spirit and morale up when turnover is really high. I know we touched on that briefly, like, and the struggles that can bring up in things like the service industry or gig related professions. So if anyone has like any input, honestly, I will take anything.
I'll just add creating, so I'm getting really sick, but just like basic organizing, like, you know, there's a reason you wanted to organize, and so redirecting to, but it's been recorded, right? So like that's why like I don't want to say too much, but just like continue building meaningful relationships with folks and remind them about the issues. Always remind them about the issues.
I would fall back on that from or support that from my time at the board investigating some of the organizing campaigns that we had to deal with and chatting with individuals. It definitely makes a difference to maintain relationships with those that are in that direct fight with you and those that are supporting you in that fight, but not letting the relationship be only about that fight. Learning each other, so when you have your moments, you can freely have your moments with the individuals. So definitely creating those relationships that can support outside of, when you pick up the phone or you're calling each other, texting each other, it's not solely about the fight that you're in, but as Guillermo just said, reminding each other every now and then what the overall purpose is, like what the bigger picture is, because it can get very defeating from what I've seen in investigating the complaints. So just keeping those connections.
Yeah, I would say celebrate the small victories, or victories, no matter how small. Like we all mentioned, we're fighting against a lot of big forces, and we're just we are people, and when we are united, right, we have people power. But small victories, big victories, taking a step to just hang out as people, as humans. I always forget to do that, like take care of yourself and take care of your loved ones, and especially your folks in the organizing fight, right? Because it can be long and it can be hard, but yeah, celebrate the small victories, no matter how small.
Thanks all. Ada, do you want to speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I guess just thinking about like the clinic I was talking about, I think making sure you get in front of whoever is new first, and not letting management frame the union story like in the first week is really important. And then if you have any like new member, like fun new member welcome materials, like buttons or stickers or like swag, posters, and then yeah, I think like having a regular like once a month like shop meeting could be good, especially if you could do it with other Starbucks workers across the city. And yeah, I know communication tools, whether that's like, just an email, listserv, or WhatsApp or whatever. But yeah, probably things that y'all are already thinking about.
Thanks so much, all. And thank you, Daisy, for that question. And really excited about all the work you all are doing. And again, hope you're celebrating and taking that time for yourself. Keith, I want to invite you to also have your question if you are able to.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, I know that these jobs can be really difficult, like we've talked about, burning the candle at both ends. And obviously there's bosses everywhere, like you said, even in labor organizing. So if you can touch on work-life balance again, and maybe just what you personally do. I know Eunice actually might have touched on it here, is just, how do you keep up with family and do what you need to do to stay sane when, times get really busy and hard?
I think like a lot of people have said, like the work is really, really inspiring, and you do know, like, we end up winning, we end up making a really huge difference in people's lives, and just like having those moments to reflect back on. And then I also think like, there's like really heavy times, and then there's also slow times, and most unions are going to build in that time to catch up and really rest. And so being able to like set your boundaries, being able to know like this is what I need to get done now, and this is what can wait, can really make a difference. And yeah, I know I feel like several of my coworkers have been able to like start their family and see it grow. So I think like that's been really encouraging for me to see.
I think mapping your life is important, and I think that like really like I think I can do better too. Like I map really well at work, but not in my personal life. But like taking a step back and mapping it, because it's all about time management. Like, I mean, it can't, you know what I'm saying? Like, why do tomorrow what you can do today? Like, and so while the work is hard and while the work is always going to be there, like I think as long as you map your stuff, like you should be good.
Yeah, definitely mapping, also like making just time for yourself, whether it's just like a few minutes between Zoom meetings, like taking a quick walk outside your door, or like making time for something that makes you happy, because burnout is real. And I think that's something that we all acknowledge. But like folks had said, it's inspiring to see the work, but also making sure, you do what makes you happy too.
Yes, to the dogs. Guillermo, I see your dog. My dog's outside walking around the living room, but yeah, I have a dog and she keeps me active, right? Like I make sure to build in, exercise and self-care into my my calendar, just like I was scheduling a meeting, right? It's so important for myself and my mental health to be like refreshed through exercise, right? So I can be fully present at work, and also knowing that campaign time is campaign time until we win, right? And there are other times where you can take it a little bit easier, right? When it's more of a 9 to 5, right? Speaking for myself, when there's like and take those times and like be like, it's okay to not be like on call all the time, right?
Thanks so much, all. Yeah, I think we could keep going probably all night with a lot of questions, but I want to be thoughtful for our panelists about the wrap up. So I want to say thank you again to our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Sai to kind of conclude. And we've had so many of you have been sharing in the chat, doing such a phenomenal job, but we will, with everybody's permission, we will connect folks with questions and share more in the chat. So I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful coworker, Sai.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rachel. And again, I want to echo a huge thanks to all of our panelists. I feel like I've learned so much from you all over the past couple of hours, and I want to do more of this all the time. But thank you again so much for all of the resources and knowledge and wisdom that you shared in this space, and for everybody else who contributed your thoughts, questions, engagement, and all of the reflections shared. I think briefly to wrap up, so there were a lot of resources that were posted in the chat over the course of the event. So Rachel and I will do the work of condensing all of this information, sharing it out with folks, sharing out contact info as well to everybody who registered for the event today. And in the next week or so, we'll also post the recording to our Bridges Center YouTube and share that out as well in the follow-up email. So please expect that in a week or two of today, and we'll send all of that out, including the video recording. Lastly, I wanted to just share some Bridges Center resources as well. This is particularly relevant for students that go to any of the University of Washington campuses, but also if you're an organization that's interested in collaborating with us on some of these things, we welcome that. So I'm posting a bunch of links in the chat right now. So one of the things to note, especially for right now, is that our scholarships and fellowships will be opening up really soon. That provides funding for students from $5,000 to $10,000. So if that's something that you're interested in, get that material support, get those funds. We are happy to answer any questions about scholarships and fellowships. And my contact is also at the very bottom of that list, that long list of links. In addition, if you're an undergraduate student, we have research grants. We also have the internship program that James mentioned before, which is the Building a Movement labor internship. That internship is similar in a lot of ways to Union Summer, where we partner with organizations in the greater Seattle area. I think one key difference between the Building a Movement labor internship and Union Summer is that we don't partner exclusively with unions for the positions. So if you're interested in what labor organizing looks like at multiple scales, whether that is union organizing or working with labor organizations that aren't unions, for example, Washington State Labor Council, or working with APALA, who we've worked with in the past several times, or the Massage Parlor Outreach Project, which does grassroots labor organizing. There's a variety of different options for students to explore the kind of involvement and ways, the different sort of scales of labor organizing that I kind of operate together to form our collective labor movement. And so it's a really great exposure in that sense. And then students also have a lot of agency over our curriculum and course discussions. We dive into labor history, contemporary labor issues, but all of this based on where students are at, the sort of perspectives that they're bringing to make that experience most meaningful to them. And then I also put in the chat a link to our newsletter sign up. So if you want to stay on top of all of these upcoming deadlines, applications, internship programs, and events, we post everything there. It's only an email once or twice a month, so we promise not to spam your inboxes. But yeah, thank you all so much again for being here and sharing this space with us. It was so great to hear from all of our panelists and to be here with you all on a Monday evening. I hope you have great dinner plans ahead. And excited to follow up with everybody really soon. Rachel, I don't know if you have anything to add, but yeah, thank you again.